ball was number 11. The time now is 2 minutes past 10.
News Talk Sport. Well, the Irish rugby squad is relocating from their pre-tournament base in Queenstown to New Plymouth tonight ahead of our World Cup opener there against USA on Sunday. Head coach Declan Kinney will wait until Friday before naming his team for that game, but he is expected to select as close to his first choice team as possible. Cian Healy's unlikely to be risked, while Gordon Darcy remains a doubt, but Sean O'Brien allayed any fears over his knee injury when he took part in a full training session earlier. Speaking tonight on Off the Ball on News Talk, former Ireland captain Keith Wood said O'Brien should play if he's in any way fit.
You just have to have O'Brien out there and just hope that his injury is, to be honest, he's not the sort of guy you'd worry about. He has that sort of mentality and attitude. You know, I'd love to have played with him. He's just a big, tough guy with great skill and great heart, a good kind of agricultural sort, you know, and I think he'll do an awful lot of damage, because if he carries the ball the way he can set a platform for a lot of other players.
And News Talk's Rugby World Cup coverage is brought to you by Volkswagen, official car partner of the Irish rugby team, driving Ireland forward. In football, Ireland manager Giovanni Trapattoni believes Tuesday's scoreless draw against Russia has furthered his case for a contract extension from the FAI. Trapattoni says he and his management team have shown why they deserve the chance to help the side qualify for Brazil 2014, but also admits the development of the team remains a work in progress. In tennis, play remains suspended at the US Open after further rain in New York earlier today. Organisers are now battling to remain on schedule after yesterday's play was a total washout. Defending champion Rafa Nadal had lost the opening 3 games of his 4th round match against Gilles Muller of Luxembourg when they were sent back to the dressing rooms earlier today. Andy Murray and Andy Roddick were also in the early stages of their matches when play was suspended. The quarter-finals involving Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer have already been postponed, though, until tomorrow as the rain continues to disrupt the schedule. For News Talk Sport, I'm Kia Marsa.
News Talk Weather with Crown Paints. 200 years of knowledge and experience in every drop. Crown, it's not just paint, it's personal.
Further outbreaks of rain tonight, but it'll become light and intermittent as the night goes on. Quite mild with lowest temperatures between 10 and 13 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Please forgive me. I know now what I do.
On Monday, former Iceland Prime Minister Geir Haarde became the first political leader to be put on trial on criminal charges for a role in the financial crisis. But in Ireland, those responsible for our crisis are more likely to get golden handshakes than jail sentences. But what about the victims of the property boom, those now facing a life sentence of negative equity and debt? Tonight we look at the case for giving them some kind of reprieve. Welcome to Coleman at Large. This is Mark Coleman. We're looking forward to your texts on 53106 at 30 cents a text, as we are to your emails on colemanatlarge@newstalk.ie. You can follow us on Twitter as well on @ColemanAtLarge. Having made the case for what I call debt restructuring, some call it debt forgiveness, I've decided tonight to surround myself with debt forgiveness skeptics. We're going to be talking to Laura Noonan of The Independent, to Dan White of the Herald, and to Professor Richard Toll of the ESRI. But I have one ally in studio tonight. I have tax specialist Mark McCutcheon, who believes that there are ways to help those who are in difficulty. First, we're going to take a little look back at the news of the day.
The context of that legislation is to ensure that those who know children are being abused inform the Gardaí, those who are the abusers are brought to justice, and that other children are protected. And this is an entirely divergence from the central focus of what we're seeking to address. And I think it would be helpful if those who are focusing on that issue focus to a far greater extent on the protection of children.
The report tells us a lot about men's health in particular, and we can see that men do not do the health checks that they need to. We've got a very high rate of prostate cancer in Ireland, a very low rate of men who have their blood pressure checked regularly, and we know that heart disease and prostate cancer are things that are infinitely preventable if you get them early.
The previous government, in its memorandum of understanding, signed off on a situation where they agreed that there would be 215 million extra income tax taken from the taxpayer for each of the next 3 years. We now have to renegotiate that with the IMF EU, and we do that on the basis of alternatives, because we regard increases in income tax like that as being a restriction upon the incentive to work in the first place.
I left all my friends back in Syria, and they've killed most of my friends right now. I've got 14 dead. I just abandoned all my friends and I had to come because I couldn't stay there. After I got shot, the security got my name, so they'd be looking for me.
Well, welcome back to Coleman at Large. Just a little skip over the main issues in today's news. The worst point is the 570 jobs lost at Talk. Like Waterford needed it. We saw Bausch & Lomb announcing 195 layoffs in March 2009. 500 jobs went at Waterford Crystal in the same year. Also, I think 315 workers lost their jobs at Teva. And as if that wasn't enough, in March of this year, GlaxoSmithKline cut its workforce in Dungarvan by 130. And the live register count for that area, 60,790 in the southeast. That's an unemployment black spot, if I ever saw one, although the live register doesn't technically measure unemployment. Also in the news today, the date set for the Dublin West by-election. I may be having a bit of fun with Dr. Bill Tormey on that issue later on. But first, we are going to talk about debt forgiveness. Oh, I nearly forgot to tell you, we'll be talking to Sean Gallagher later on as well. But first, we're going to talk about debt forgiveness. And on my left is a hard-hearted woman by the name of Laura Noonan, who
Good evening, Mark.
Good
How
evening.
are you?
Good evening to you. Who recently wrote in the Irish Independent that there should be no debt forgiveness at all. How could you be so cruel, Laura?
Well, I wrote two things. First of all, that there can't be any debt forgiveness, and then that even if there could be, that there oughtn't to be. And there are a number of reasons around that. It isn't just cold-heartedness, it's that it is impossible, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit why I think it's impossible. The first thing is that there's the whole fairness issue, and even if you go with the concept, which I don't believe, that debt forgiveness as a proposition is fair, how do you fairly implement it? The Irish bailed out banks, the ones which we can directly control less than half of the total mortgages. There's 115 billion worth of mortgages in the market. The banks that we own have half of those. So are you really going to have those banks doing debt forgiveness when people in identical situations who happen to bank with Ulster, who the state doesn't have any power to force it on, won't be saved? Can you really say, if you happen to bank with AIB and you're in a bad situation, we'll save you? If you happen to bank with Ulster, you're on your own. How are you going to do that? I think that's a real issue with it. There's also the fairness issue typically. I mean, you have some people who were in negative equity, who were in these awful situations, who, as we reported in the Irish Independent last week, have actually already had to leave their homes. Right. What do you say to those people who sold up last year, and had they hung on for an extra year or two, they might have gotten that? How do you... Then you have people who didn't actually buy homes. I mean, what you would essentially be doing, and I'm rarely accused of being a socialist or left-wing, but there is an argument for this. People who never actually owned homes, who in the boom, they were on average wages, they thought, listen, okay, the bank will give me a mortgage for 10 times salary, but I can't pay that back, so I'm going to stay in my council house. I won't buy a house. Now my taxes are going to subsidise someone else's home ownership when I can't own a home. And the final point, and I am almost finished, thank you, Mark, is that the scale of the problem is very large. There's 115 billion stock of mortgages. There are already 10 billion worth which are in arrears according to the last figures. That is a massive number, and the idea that we could do a debt forgiveness scheme for, say, 4 billion, 5 billion, 6 billion, it's just not credible. It would cost an awful lot more. There is some money already set aside, but we can't do a mass market scheme. It would cost too much. Yes,
Can I come back at you? We have just done a massive debt forgiveness scheme. It's called the bank bailout, and it wasn't 4 or 5, 6 billion. It was upwards of 25 to 30 billion.
Absolutely.
In response to the very valid point you made about those who rented, I would suggest that anyone who's bought a property in the last 10 years has paid a whole bunch of stamp duty, which renters, those renting, did not have to pay. So in effect, the people in mortgage debt now have been subsidising the rest of the economy by paying a fortune in stamp duty. Not only a fortune in stamp duty, between 50 and 70% of the price of a house went to the government in tax, VAT, corporation tax. The people who have borrowed money paid a fortune to the Exchequer, which was wasted. Isn't there a case for giving them some of that money back?
I'm going to have to fundamentally just agree with you on part of that, and that is a lot of people are like me. I mean, I bought a house recently. I didn't pay any stamp duty. Anyone who buys their first house doesn't pay any stamp duty. Most of the people
paid a fortune to the government in other taxes.
Most
because
of the
that
people
price,
who were in
builders'
over their
levies,
heads,
VAT, income taxes,
well,
the government
I know
creamed
I
it.
paid basically nothing. Most of the people who were in over their heads
did.
are actually
Laura,
first-time buyers
You may not
who
think
didn't pay stamp duty. So I don't see how you can advance that argument.
You may think you may not have paid stamp duty. You may not have paid stamp duty. My point is the government deliberately creamed it on builders' levies, on builders' VAT, on income taxes, on corporation taxes. 60%. Roughly, of the price of the house you paid went to the government in tax. I guarantee
Well, it
that
all went to NAM, actually, as it happens.
Exactly.
But, which is the government. But I think that since a lot of people we're talking about did not pay stamp duty, that's an issue.
Okay.
But even if they did, there's a fundamental fairness. Do you really want the working class person who was in a council house to be subsidising through their foregone public services?
But they are being subsidised. Hang on, their council house is being subsidised by the taxpayers who paid stamp duty.
But should they have to subsidise by paying higher taxes the home ownership? The other real issue is that what is a home? Should we be subsidising and forgiving debt or restructuring debt for someone in a house worth, say, 2 million, 3 million, 600,000? Really?
All right. Text already in. Rob from Dublin. I'm in negative equity for 150k. I'm a first-time buyer and bought at 290,000. I can pay my mortgage, but I can do nothing else. I will not and cannot spend in the economy. My entire life will be paying back a bank and funding tracker mortgages. It looks like a great life. By the way, we bailed out developers, not banks, says Rob. Neil in Cluny says Laura's arguments are weak and sensitive and void of understanding the big picture for the people of Ireland. I will let Laura defend herself there, but first I'm going to turn to another man who I suspect has a hard-hearted nature on this topic. Dan White, are you with us?
I am, yes, Mark.
Do you agree with Laura?
I don't actually, because I mean there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who are massively overborrowed. I mean, you can construct it however you choose to construct it, as a moral or as an economic argument. A huge chunk. I mean, the bottom line is that a huge chunk of that debt is not going to be repaid, and I think it's about how do you manage the write-down. I mean, you can, and until you do, the economy is going to be stalled.
Okay, so how would you go about it?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, there's various notions of of a debt forgiveness, some sort of formal debt forgiveness mechanism, which I think would be horrifically complicated. I think the best way to do it would be over a couple of years. Would be if inflation were allowed to increase, but unfortunately our German masters aren't inclined to permit that.
Well, Professor Richard Tull is free to comment on that when I turn to him in a few minutes, but one man who has a few ideas on how a form of debt forgiveness could be implemented is tax expert Mark McCutcheon, who's with us. Mark, what do you say?
Well, I agree with Dan when he says that the economy will stagnate. I agree with Dan when he says that the economy will stagnate if we don't have debt forgiveness for those borrowers that actually need it. I would also disagree with many of the commentators who suggest that we should have a blanket scheme. But the debt forgiveness that Morgan Kelly proposed is not actually a blanket scheme in general. It's for those borrowers who actually need it, who, let's say, for example, who are unemployed and who, through no fault of their own, are in a sector that's going to be depressed for the foreseeable future.
But would you agree, Morgan, who deserves praise on for many reasons, particularly blowing the whistle on regulation failure a couple of years ago, not necessarily specific about how the whole idea is going to work. And if I'm sitting there in the Department of Finance, or if I'm Michael Noonan, I'm open-minded. I'll consider a proposal that will work. But the way it's been framed so far, it ain't going to work.
Well, the BlackRock solutions were brought in to undertake a review of the bank books and the mortgages in question to put a figure on the recapitalisation that was needed to put the banks in good stead. They have identified a particular figure on a macro level that's required to cover losses on the mortgage book. So therefore, we are told that BlackRock Solutions undertook a forensic review of the bank's books. So therefore, they have identified the mortgages that are already in trouble and that are going to go into default. and on that basis, we already know what mortgages are going to go into default if BlackRock Solutions exercise is reliable.